Join me as I dive into the wild story of a mom who kept her 5-month-old son a secret from his millionaire dad. Can I uncover the truth behind this shocking situation? Jasmine Reynolds had always been a force of nature. Her upbringing in Atlanta taught her to hustle, to persevere, and to never settle for less than she deserved. The crowded streets and vibrant energy of her hometown were etched into her spirit, shaping a woman who could hold her own in any room. With her sharp wit and warm smile, Jasmine captivated everyone she met, but none more so than Adrian Steele. Adrian was everything Jasmine wasn't. A tech mogul who had built his empire from scratch, he lived in a world of luxury and high-stakes decisions. When they met at an exclusive charity gala, sparks flew immediately. Adrian was drawn to her authenticity in a sea of pretense, and Jasmine couldn't resist his charm and intensity. Their connection was electric, the kind of chemistry that felt fated. The early days of their romance were magical. Adrian whisked Jasmine away on spontaneous trips, from candlelit dinners in Paris to private yacht rides along the Amalfi Coast. But it wasn't the opulence that won her over. It was the way Adrian looked at her, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. For a while, Jasmine allowed herself to dream of a future with him, a future where their worlds seamlessly intertwined. But the magic began to dim as reality set in. Adrian's life as a CEO was relentless. Late-night calls, endless meetings, and the constant demand to stay ahead in a competitive industry began to chip away at their time together. Jasmine found herself dining alone in his penthouse more often than not, her laughter echoing in empty rooms. At first, Adrian tried to balance his work and their relationship. He'd send flowers to her office, leave heartfelt notes on her pillow, and promise her that things would slow down. But they never did. The love that had once felt invincible was now overshadowed by his ambition and the weight of his responsibilities. Jasmine, too proud to beg for more of his time, quietly endured the loneliness. But her patience wasn't infinite. The final straw came one rainy evening when Adrian missed their anniversary dinner. She sat in the restaurant, watching the waitstaff clear the table she had painstakingly reserved, her heart breaking with every passing minute. When Adrian finally called, his voice full of apologies, Jasmine realized she couldn't continue to live in his shadow. "I love you, Adrian," she said, her voice trembling, "but I can't be the woman who waits for scraps of your time. I deserve more than this." Walking away from him was the hardest thing she had ever done. Adrian begged her to reconsider, but Jasmine knew that staying would mean losing herself. She packed her bags and left his penthouse, the diamond bracelet he had given her left on the kitchen counter like a forgotten dream. What Adrian didn't know was that Jasmine carried more than heartbreak when she left. She was pregnant with their child, a secret she chose to keep for reasons that weighed heavily on her soul. Jasmine feared that Adrian's high-pressure world would consume their child, turning him into another cog in the machine of wealth and power. Jasmine vowed to raise her baby alone, shielding him from the chaos of Adrian's life. She convinced herself it was the right decision, but in the quiet moments, doubt crept in. As she caressed her growing belly, she wondered if her choice would one day come back to haunt her. While Adrian buried himself in work to numb the pain of losing Jasmine, he had no idea that his legacy was already taking shape miles away, a child he had no clue existed. And so, their paths diverged, each unaware of how fate would one day bring them back together, sparking a storm neither could have foreseen. The first time Jasmine held Elijah in her arms, the world seemed to stand still. His tiny fingers curled around hers, and his piercing blue eyes, Adrian's eyes, gazed up at her, oblivious to the weight of the world he had just entered. In that moment, Jasmine's heart filled with a love she had never known. She vowed to protect him, no matter what it took. But that vow came with sacrifices. Raising Elijah alone was a challenge Jasmine hadn't fully anticipated. Her once organized life became a whirlwind of diapers, midnight feedings, and endless exhaustion. As a freelance writer, She worked tirelessly during Elijah's naps, her laptop perched on the edge of their small dining table. Some days, deadlines loomed over her like dark clouds, and the rent notice on the counter felt like a ticking time bomb. Still, Jasmine refused to let despair win. She transformed their modest apartment into a warm, loving home. She painted the nursery herself, choosing cheerful yellow walls to mask the peeling paint beneath. Every night she rocked Elijah to sleep, humming lullabies she remembered from her childhood, her voice often trembling with exhaustion but never faltering in love. Elijah grew quickly, his laughter filling their small space with joy. His every milestone, a toothless grin, a wobbly attempt at crawling, was a triumph that made Jasmine's sacrifices feel worthwhile. Yet every time she looked into his eyes, she was reminded of Adrian and the life she had left behind. Jasmine often wondered if she had made the right choice. Elijah was a happy baby, but he deserved more than she could give him alone. Her freelance income barely covered their needs, and there were nights when she skipped meals to ensure there was enough formula for Elijah. But the thought of reintroducing Adrian into their lives terrified her. Adrian's world was one of boardroom battles, ruthless ambition, and unrelenting pressure. Jasmine feared that world would crush Elijah's innocence, turning her sweet, carefree boy into a pawn in a game of power and wealth. She couldn't bear the thought of Elijah growing up feeling like an accessory to his father's empire. To the outside world, Jasmine appeared strong and composed. Friends and neighbors admired her dedication, often commenting on how well she was handling motherhood. But behind closed doors, the cracks in her armor showed. There were nights when she cried silently, her tears soaking into Elijah's baby blanket as she questioned her decision to keep him a secret. Her resolve began to waver as Elijah grew older. He was a curious child, always reaching for her face with tiny hands and babbling as if he had 1,000 stories to tell. Jasmine couldn't ignore the ache in her chest every time he laughed, a laugh so much like Adrian's. She wondered if she was robbing Elijah of a part of himself by keeping his father away. The struggle wasn't just emotional, it was practical too. When Elijah fell ill with a high fever one winter night, Jasmine panicked. The clinic she could afford had long lines and a frazzled doctor who barely glanced at Elijah before prescribing medicine. That night, as she sat by his crib, watching him breathe, she realized just how precarious their situation was. What if something worse happened? What if she couldn't provide for him? The questions gnawed at her, fueling her sleepless nights. Jasmine began to imagine what life would be like if Adrian knew about Elijah. His wealth could give Elijah opportunities she could only dream of: a better home, access to the best schools, and a future without financial worry. But Jasmine couldn't shake the fear of losing control. She had seen the ruthless side of Adrian, the man who fought tooth and nail to stay on top. What if he demanded full custody? What if he used his power to take Elijah away from her? Caught in the crossfire of love and fear, Jasmine continued to shield Elijah from the truth. Yet every time she looked into his eyes, she felt the weight of her secret pressing harder. Deep down, she knew the truth wouldn't stay buried forever. Fate had a way of unraveling even the best-laid plans, and Jasmine could sense that her carefully constructed world was on the verge of collapse. It was a chilly afternoon, and Jasmine decided to take Elijah out for a walk in the park. She loved these little outings, where the crisp air seemed to clear her mind and Elijah's giggles melted away her worries. On their way home, she stopped by a quaint coffee shop to warm up and catch her breath. The cafe was cozy and quiet, with the soft hum of conversation and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Jasmine found a corner table, cradling Elijah in her arms, while she sipped her latte. Elijah cooed softly, his tiny fingers playing with the edge of her scarf. Jasmine smiled, feeling a rare moment of peace. But peace is a fragile thing. The sound of a familiar voice froze her mid-sip. It was a voice she hadn't heard in nearly a year, but one she could never forget. Her heart pounded as she turned her head slowly, almost hoping she was mistaken. There, Just a few feet away stood Adrian Steele. He looked the same yet different, still impeccably dressed, his presence commanding the room, but his expression was softer, as if time had worn away some of his sharp edges. He was speaking with someone, his tone casual, but then his gaze shifted, and their eyes met. Jasmine's stomach dropped. Adrian's expression shifted from surprise to confusion, and then his eyes fell on the baby in her arms. Time seemed to stand still as he stared at Elijah, his piercing blue eyes a mirror of his own. "Jasmine?" His voice was low but firm, carrying a weight that made her chest tighten. "Is that my son?" Jasmine felt the air leave her lungs. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in her nightmares, but nothing had prepared her for the real thing. She started, her voice cracking under the pressure. Elijah, sensing her tension, began to squirm in her arms. Adrian stepped closer, his gaze never leaving the baby. His face was a storm of emotions, shock, anger, and something else Jasmine couldn't quite place. "Answer me, Jasmine. Is he mine?" Panic surged through her veins. She couldn't do this. Not here. Not now. Her instincts screamed at her to protect Elijah, to get away before the situation spiraled further out of control. "I have to go," she blurted, clutching Elijah tighter. She moved quickly, brushing past Adrian as he reached out to stop her. "Jasmine, wait." Adrian's voice followed her as she pushed open the cafe door, the cold air hitting her like a slap. Her mind raced as she hurried down the street, Elijah's cries mingling with the thud of her heartbeat. She felt Adrian's gaze burning into her back through the cafe window, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. When she finally reached her apartment, she locked the door and leaned against it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Elijah had calmed down, but Jasmine hadn't. Her hands trembled as she set him down in his crib, her mind replaying the encounter in an endless loop. Adrian knew, or at least he suspected. She knew Adrian well enough to understand that he wouldn't let this go. He was a man who thrived on answers, on control, and now that he had seen Elijah, he would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. Jasmine's phone buzzed and her heart sank. It was a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. You owe me an explanation." She knew it was Adrian. Jasmine sank onto the couch, her hands covering her face. The secret she had fought so hard to keep was unraveling faster than she could handle. She had hoped to shield Elijah from Adrian's world, but fate had other plans. What would Adrian do now? Would he fight her for custody? Demand to be part of Elijah's life? Or worse, use his wealth and power to take Elijah away from her entirely? Tears filled Jasmine's eyes as she looked toward the crib where Elijah slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing around him. She had always known this day might come, but she hadn't expected it to arrive so soon, or so suddenly. One thing was certain. Adrian wasn't the kind of man to let questions go unanswered, and Jasmine wasn't sure if she was ready for the battle that was about to begin. Adrian Steele was not a man who dealt in uncertainty. After the encounter at the coffee shop, he couldn't focus. The memory of the baby with his unmistakable blue eyes haunted him, leaving him restless and irritable. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Adrian called his most trusted investigator, a man known for discretion and efficiency. "I need everything you can find on Jasmine Reynolds," he said coldly. "Where she's been, what she's been doing, and most importantly, the truth about that child." The wait was agonizing, but Adrian buried himself in work, trying to suppress the storm brewing inside him. When the report landed on his desk just days later, he hesitated for a moment before opening it. The truth stared back at him in black and white. Elijah Reynolds was, without question, his son. Adrian's emotions exploded in a whirlwind of betrayal, fury, and an unexpected pang of guilt. He thought back to the nights he had spent working late, the times he had missed crucial moments with Jasmine, because he had prioritized his empire over their relationship. Was this his punishment for letting her slip away? But anger overshadowed his guilt. Jasmine had kept his son from him, his own flesh and blood. He deserved answers, and he was going to get them. The next evening, Adrian arrived at Jasmine's apartment unannounced. The building was a far cry from the luxurious penthouse they had once shared. The faded walls and creaky stairs grated against his pride, igniting his anger even more. How could she choose this life for their son? Jasmine opened the door, her face pale when she saw him. "Adrian," she breathed, clutching Elijah closer. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his presence filling the small space. His eyes scanned the room briefly, before landing on Elijah, who gazed at him with wide, curious eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" Adrian's voice was sharp, but there was pain beneath the anger. "How could you keep my son from me?" Jasmine's throat tightened, but she held her ground. "I had my reasons, Adrian." "Reasons?" He laughed bitterly, his hands clenched into fists. "You had reasons to deny me the chance to know my own son, to rob him of his father?" Tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I did what I thought was best for Elijah. Your world, your life. It's not a place for a child, Adrian. It's cold, ruthless, and filled with people who would use him as leverage against you. I didn't want him to grow up in that." Adrian was stunned by her words, his anger faltering as he processed her reasoning. "You think I can't protect my own son? That I wouldn't give him everything he needs?" "It's not about money, Adrian." Jasmine's voice cracked, her tears finally spilling over. "It's about what kind of life he would have. I didn't want him growing up feeling like a pawn in your empire, surrounded by people who care more about your fortune than your family." Adrian felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. He had always believed that wealth could solve any problem, that it was the ultimate form of security. But Jasmine's words cut through his defenses, forcing him to confront a truth he had never considered. His success had come at a cost. He looked at Elijah, who had fallen asleep in Jasmine's arms, blissfully unaware of the tension in the room. For the first time, Adrian questioned the life he had built. Was it really a place for a child? For a family? "You should have told me," Adrian said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "I deserve to know, Jasmine. Elijah deserved to know his father." Jasmine nodded, her tears falling freely. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I was scared, Adrian. Scared of losing him, of losing myself in your world again. I didn't know how to make it work." Silence filled the room as they stared at each other, the weight of their shared past pressing down on them. For the first time in years, Adrian didn't have a plan. He didn't know how to fix this, how to bridge the gap between them. But one thing was clear. Elijah was his son, and he wasn't going to let another day go by without being part of his life. Whether Jasmine liked it or not, Adrian was determined to fight for his place in Elijah's world. Adrian's initial approach was measured. He reached out to Jasmine with an olive branch, proposing a co-parenting arrangement. He assured her that he didn't want to uproot Elijah from his life, but simply wanted to be present for his son. "I'm not here to take him away from you," Adrian had said one evening as they sat across from each other in her modest living room. Elijah played with blocks on the floor, oblivious to the tension between his parents. "I just want to be his father, Jasmine. He deserves that." But Jasmine couldn't shake her doubts. "Your world is so different from ours, Adrian," she said, her voice laced with worry. "I don't want Elijah to lose the simple, grounded life I've worked so hard to give him. I'm afraid your influence will overpower what I've built for him." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he nodded, recognizing her fears. "I understand, but this isn't just about you or me. It's about what's best for Elijah, and I think we both know that includes having both of his parents in his life." Jasmine couldn't argue with that, but her heart remained torn. Tensions escalated when Adrian, frustrated by Jasmine's reluctance, turned to his legal team. Within a week, Jasmine received a formal custody petition. The document outlined Adrian's demand for joint custody, but it felt like a blow to Jasmine's fragile world. The news quickly leaked to the press, turning their private battle into a public spectacle. Headlines splashed across tabloids. Millionaire CEO fights for custody of secret son, and single mother takes on tech mogul in courtroom drama. Jasmine found herself hounded by reporters whenever she stepped outside. The media painted Adrian as a cold, calculating businessman, willing to use his wealth and influence to get what he wanted. Jasmine, meanwhile, was cast as the defiant single mother, fighting to protect her child from a world of privilege and power. The courtroom became a battlefield with both sides presenting their cases. Adrian's legal team argued that he had the means and resources to provide Elijah with opportunities Jasmine could never afford. They highlighted his success, his philanthropy, and his desire to be an involved father. Jasmine's lawyer countered with a portrait of a loving mother who had sacrificed everything for her son. They argued that Elijah's life was stable and happy, and that introducing him to Adrian's world could be disruptive and harmful. But the turning point came when Adrian took the stand. For the first time, he spoke not as a CEO or a man of power, but as a father. "I made mistakes," Adrian admitted, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "I was so consumed with building my business that I let the most important person in my life slip away. Jasmine left because I couldn't see what really mattered. And now I have a son, our son. I don't want to take him away from his mother, I just want to be there for him, to show him that I can be better. I'm willing to change. For him. And for Jasmine." The courtroom fell silent. Even Jasmine couldn't stop the tears that welled in her eyes as she listened to Adrian's heartfelt words. This was a side of him she hadn't seen before, a vulnerability that made her question whether she had underestimated him. As the judge prepared to make a decision, Jasmine found herself reflecting on everything. She had fought so hard to protect Elijah from Adrian's world, but in doing so, had she been protecting herself more than her son? That night, she sat by Elijah's crib watching him sleep. She thought about what Adrian had said, and the sincerity in his voice. Denying Adrian his son wouldn't shield Elijah from pain. It would create a different kind of wound. Elijah deserved to know his father, just as much as he deserved the love and stability she had worked so hard to provide. When the court reconvened, Jasmine made a surprising move. She stood before the judge and spoke directly to Adrian. "I've been afraid, Adrian," she said, her voice trembling. "Afraid of losing Elijah, of losing control over the life I've built for him. But I see now that keeping him from you isn't the answer. Elijah deserves to have both of us in his life. And I'm willing to try, to work with you, for his sake." Adrian's expression softened, a mix of relief and gratitude. For the first time, it felt like the battle was over, replaced by the possibility of something new. A partnership, however fragile, built on their shared love for Elijah. The judge approved their joint custody agreement, and as they left the courtroom, Adrian and Jasmine exchanged a look that spoke volumes. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together for their son. Verse 6. A family reimagined. Months of tension had passed since the courtroom battle, yet Adrian and Jasmine still struggled to find common ground. The rift between their worlds, one rooted in power, luxury, and relentless ambition, and the other in simplicity, love, and quiet sacrifice, seemed insurmountable at times. But the love they both had for Elijah, their son, their connection, was undeniable, and that love would be the force that drove them to rebuild. After countless late-night discussions and painful but necessary compromises, they finally reached an agreement. Adrian, in a surprising move, scaled back his overwhelming work commitments. The tech mogul who once thrived on 80-hour work weeks was now deliberately making space for his son. He arranged his schedule to ensure he could spend weekends with Elijah, took holidays off, and even began delegating more of his responsibilities to trusted executives within his company. Jasmine, on the other hand, found herself allowing Adrian into their lives, but only on her terms. She had been protective of Elijah, afraid that Adrian's world would overshadow their quiet life. But she slowly began to soften. She saw that he was trying, truly trying to be a father. And with every small gesture, whether it was showing up early to Elijah's soccer games or asking for advice on bedtime stories, Adrian was proving that he could balance the demands of being a tech mogul and a loving parent. The shift wasn't immediate. At first, Jasmine maintained her distance, keeping things cordial but cautious. She watched Adrian from the sidelines, waiting for him to slip back into his old ways. But over time, something remarkable happened. Adrian showed that he could be both a loving father and a supportive partner. He understood that his presence wasn't just about material support, but emotional connection. He began taking the time to ask how Jasmine was feeling, what she needed, and how they could make their co-parenting arrangement work without stepping on each other's toes. One day, while they were sitting together on the porch of Jasmine's apartment, watching Elijah play with a new toy that Adrian had bought for him, Jasmine couldn't help but notice how natural it felt to have him there. Adrian wasn't just a visitor in their lives anymore. He was a real, active part of their world. "I never thought we'd get here," Jasmine admitted softly, her eyes fixed on Elijah as he laughed, running in circles. I thought we'd always be apart, that you'd always be the billionaire, and I'd always be the mother trying to shield him from everything you represent." Adrian's gaze never left Elijah. He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that spoke volumes. "I was wrong, Jasmine. You were right. I thought my money and my name could fix everything. But nothing matters if I don't have you and him in my life." Jasmine glanced at him, surprised by his sincerity. The Adrian she had once known was confident to the point of arrogance, always in control. The man sitting beside her now, with tears in his eyes as he looked at their son, was different. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had the capacity for growth, for change. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me that there's more to you than just the business. I'm starting to see it, and I know Elijah will too." As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Adrian and Jasmine navigated the delicate waters of co-parenting. They learned to communicate better, to set boundaries, and to respect each other's needs. Elijah flourished in this new environment, surrounded by the love of both his parents, each bringing something unique to the table. Adrian's bond with Elijah deepened. He wasn't just the father who sent expensive gifts and rare toys. He was the one who picked Elijah up from school, who made breakfast on lazy Sunday mornings, and who stayed up late with him, discussing the latest superheroes or teaching him how to play chess. He was present, truly present, in a way that Jasmine hadn't thought possible. Meanwhile, Jasmine's perspective shifted too. She had been so focused on protecting Elijah from Adrian's world that she hadn't seen how that world could also offer him opportunities. Adrian wasn't perfect, but he was committed. He had the resources to give Elijah an education that Jasmine had only dreamed of, and he had the determination to ensure his son would never feel neglected again. As they spent more time together, the spark that had once burned so brightly between them reignited. It wasn't the same as before, but there was something beautiful in its evolution. There were quiet moments of tenderness, shared glances, and unspoken understanding. Jasmine no longer saw Adrian as the man who had hurt her. She saw him as the father of her child, the man who had the potential to build a future with her, not through wealth, but through trust, respect, and love. One evening, as they sat together in Elijah's room, watching their son sleep peacefully after a bedtime story, Jasmine finally voiced what had been in her heart for so long. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of losing myself, of losing Elijah to your world. But I see now, it's not about power or money. It's about the love we share as a family. Adrian squeezed her hand, a rare moment of vulnerability crossing his features. We've both made mistakes, but I'm here now, Jasmine. I'm here for both of you, in every way that matters. Together they had redefined what family meant, no longer defined by wealth or status, but by the love, sacrifice, and connection that bound them. Through time, trust, and forgiveness, they found a new path forward, a family reimagined, and a future built on the foundation of the most powerful force they had: love.